So I want to connect a bit briefly what happened last night. I see Ashley. Thank you again, Ashley. And I think Smriti is somewhere here as well. Thank you again. One of the things you heard last night was exactly this call to action. That it's not just enough to share these stories, which is super powerful, but it's also really important to actually take tangible action to change the situation we see ourselves in, especially in terms of not being able to hit the SDG goals. Um, I want to just highlight one thing. There's an amazing lineup today for all of you. You should have seen it. We're going to start with panels. We're going to start with keynotes as well. But I want to highlight, to me, what is in some ways the most unique part of today for you, which is the incubation rooms. And the reason I want to highlight these incubation rooms is these rooms are a fundamental commitment by us collectively, WAPP and CID, in really bringing us together as a call for action. So these rooms are essentially going to incubate ideas, which we will support. This year, we're happy to announce the second GEM Incubation Fund, which will come from this conference, from these incubation rooms you'll see in the afternoon. We really hope these conversations you will have, and I encourage you to look, if you haven't already, on your schedules. There are 5 different incubation rooms. Look at them, see which ones really appeal to you. We have some phenomenal researchers and practitioners in those rooms leading conversations. And what we invite you to do is join us in those conversations, because sometimes learning can be very passive. You come listen to a panel and it's exciting, but you don't feel engaged in it. I see Nima over here, thank you, from the Radcliffe Institute as well. We want you to experience not just research or practice as it's talked about, but as it develops. We want you to see what it means to take an idea from its very early stages about what is the problem we should be thinking about? Why is this problem there? To the next stage of saying, how do we actually come together to work out a solution? I don't want you to just see the solutions when they're finished. I want you to do the solutions before we even have started thinking about the problems. That process of co-creation is a process we want you to really understand, because we believe that the only way to truly understand a problem is to be involved in that process of co-creation. And in many ways, we think this is the future of development as a field. Development as a field which we want us to be collaborative. It's no longer just the North helping the South with resources and money. That's not the world we live in now. The world we live in now is a world of equal collaborations and partnerships, where the North and the South and the West and the East can come together both intellectually, financially, and in terms of just a will to make change. And you saw a lot of this reflected actually in our dinner conversation last night. I'm also excited this year to announce that the GEM Incubation Fund will be supported by the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard and the Harvard Data Science Initiative as well. With that, I will introduce Iris. Iris is someone who I have personally learned tremendous amount from. When I first joined the Kennedy School, she was a senior faculty, I was a fledgling junior faculty, and over the years she has been just a tremendous role model, both as a faculty member, as an academic dean, and honestly a tremendous leader in this space. So Iris, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Asim, and good morning, everyone. Wonderful to see you. Wonderful to have many of you back from last night. I want to, in fact, pick up on something that also was mentioned last night, also by the wonderful Ashley Judd, and that is that stories are really important, that we have to tell the stories about our experiences and about other people's experiences. And I want to tell you 4 stories. 4 stories that are backed by empirical evidence. So, for a researcher, that makes, of course, my heart sing in some interesting ways. So the first story starts in 1993, when India amended its constitution with the provision that 1/3 of village head positions had to be reserved for women. It turns out that this was a natural experiment, which again is really important from a research perspective, because the villages were picked randomly out of a hat. So that allowed, in fact, quite a number of papers, more than 20 today, to evaluate what difference does difference make. Do these women leaders make different policies? Do these women leaders make different choices? Do these women leaders impact women in different ways? And all of that has been studied, but the one I want to highlight here in particular is that in villages that had been exposed to at least 2 female leaders, perceptions of what political leadership looks like started to change. people started to associate political leadership with women to the degree that parents wanted their daughters to become politicians. That's the power of role models. Seeing really is believing, and it's important to see people who we might not typically expect in certain roles in those positions. I'm going to quickly go to the global north for another example, and that is Finland. Many of you probably don't know that until a few years ago, Finland had quotas for male elementary school teachers because they understood that girls and boys needed exposure to role models, and that boys in our schools, where of course now 85 to 90% of the teachers are women, that boys also needed male role models. Research shows that when the quota was abolished, it hurt both boys and girls. So diversity has many interesting facets and many, many benefits. Both of these policies in Finland and in India, of course, came about because of government intervention. And that's my first point for you here. We need to think about good policymaking. We need to think about public policy and how public policy can affect gender equity. My second example. A few years ago, Brazil introduced some regulations to make hiring for the public service more impartial. That included, for example, better screening procedures, including removing names from resumes. It also included better interview procedures, moving from unstructured interviews to structured interviews. It turns out that the research, again, shows that it did matter, that it changed the gender gap in evaluations of applicants. It also increased the likelihood that women would apply, and it increased the likelihood that women were hired. Note the second point. That's actually an important one that is often forgotten. When we level the playing field, when we make this world more fair, we will attract more talent, because the talent now knows that they have a fair chance. So changing our organizational practices and procedures is as important potentially as changing public policy. So that's my second takeaway for you. In addition to public policy, we need to focus on what organizations, whether that is in the private sector, in the public sector, in NGOs, independent of where the organization is, we have to fix those procedures to really level the playing field and give meritocracy a real chance and allow women and everyone to climb up the career ladder. Now, my third leg of this three-legged stool right now, you'll see it has to have a fourth leg to be really stable, but my third leg are social norms. Social norms are not written down typically. They're invisible, they're understandings. They help us coordinate, they help us do our business. They have lots of advantages, but they also can hold us back. They also turn out to be pretty sticky. But they can be changed, which takes me to Saudi Arabia, where some really interesting research shows that Saudi men, Saudi husbands, I should be more precise, are more willing to allow and support their women in working outside of the home when they know that other husbands are willing to do so. Right? That's kind of the power of social norms, in that we want to go with the crowd. We want to go with what other people think, and very often we have wrong expectations about other people's beliefs. Research right here at Harvard has taken some of these insights into very different places, back to Brazil, but also to Africa, Nigeria, focused on the power of television, of art, of media, kind of building again on yesterday's discussion, kind of showing that you can affect people's attitudes to HIV/AIDS. You can affect gender-based violence by exposing people to counter stereotypical messages, to counter stereotypical role models, to information that they might not normally hear about and that might affect their beliefs about what the social norm is. So my third pillar for you is social norms, right? We need to think about public policy. We need to think about what organizations do. And we need to think about those social norms. And finally, my fourth leg for our stool here is individual agency. Everything I've talked about so far is a bit more in the context in which we function and is super important. But at the end of the day, we also need to think about what agency people have, women have, girls have, to not just move up the career ladder, but in fact, in my next research example, also out of Harvard here, even as they are going to school. This is really important research where people have looked at whether when we give girls, so think girls, right? These are school-age children, middle school typically, when we give girls negotiation training, is that going to empower them to assert their agency, including with their parents, including with their teachers, including with their sugar daddies? And it turns out it helps. It turns out that, in fact, it helps very much in Zambia, where the research was done on the ground. So, we also need to think about agency. We need to do the social norms. We need to do our work in our organizations. And we have to work on public policy. If you're interested in learning more about any of the studies I just mentioned, please visit the Women in Public Policy Program's Gender Action Portal. GAP for short. It's an online platform that I know many of you know, and that, of course, was generally supported by the Women's Leadership Board present here today. It summarizes research for decision makers, policymakers around the world. It's been used by more than 1 million users now. It's one of our passions, also of this conference, to make sure that we're not staying in the ivory tower, but we're making accessible the knowledge that we need to change the world. And that's not a small ask. That is our ask to all of you for our conference. Please help us make the world a better place for everyone. Thank you.